Merry morning or magical midnight, my friends. I am Tillie Treadwell, and today I have with me a very dear friend of mine, as well as you could say, co-creator of this show. This is Tim Swartz. Tim, hello. Thank you for being here.
Well, hi, Tilly. Thank you very much for asking me to be on today. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. So I know who you are, but some newer guests or some newbies to the paranormal realm may not quite yet know who you are. Could you please bring us up to speed on who you are?
Oh my gosh. Where do I
There's a lot.
where do I begin with that? My name is Tim Swartz, and I write under the name Tim R. Swartz. I include my middle initial, not because I think that it makes it sound better, but because there are several other Tim Swartzes out there who write. One of them seems to me to be a musician, or at least he writes about the theory of music. And then there is another Tim Swartz out there that is a mathematician. And I hated the thought that people would get me mixed up with him because I'm sure that, a mathematician. And then here I am writing about UFOs and ghosts and Bigfoot and paranormal things like that. I'm sure he would just want to be associated with that kind of stuff. So that's why I decided to include my middle initial to try to separate myself from these other poor guys. But yeah, I have been a researcher and investigator and writer of the world of the weird for a huge number of years. I've lost count at this point. I started as a kid when I was really kind of forced into the subject. Around third grade, uh, our third grade teacher used to give us assignments based on headlines at the time. All right. And then we would have to write an essay and then present it in front of the class. So every week, everybody would get something different. One week, I got a story about UFOs.
Oh,
And so I had to write, and I had no idea what UFOs. I wasn't interested in UFOs. I was interested in science and science fiction at the time, but really didn't have any knowledge of UFOs. Now, if you had asked me to write something at the time about race cars and the Indianapolis 500, oh man, I could have written a 30-page dissertation, with photos and special effects and all of that. But UFOs, forget about it. But after I wrote that and made my presentation, then that was it. I was the flying saucer guy to my classmates. I was the guy that believed in little green men from Mars and all of that other stuff. Um, and I tried to avoid all of that, but it stuck. That's what stuck
gosh.
to me.
Yeah.
But what was interesting was that, people would make fun of you, when everybody else was around. But then later they'd come to you separately and say, well, I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then they'd proceed to tell me a story about, how their family was on vacation and they saw a UFO, or their great grandmother has been appearing at the foot of their bed weeks after she had passed away.
Yeah.
Stories like that.
Yeah.
And that's what drew me in. It was these stories coming from people who had no idea that other people were saying kind of the same sort of stories. And that's what was really interesting to me, was that, I mean, yeah, the subject matter was interesting, but the fact that people were having these experiences, all right, and weren't able to tell anybody
Yeah.
about their experiences for fear of being made fun of, or they had no idea what was going on. All right. Because, and it's a little bit different now with reality television. People are more aware of these kinds of subjects. But when I was growing up, not so much. You maybe had a show called In Search of with Leonard Nimoy and Peter Graves. That that may have some people may have been familiar with that, but other than that, most people had no idea. All right, and people would tell me these stories most of the time not wanting me to write about them or anything like that. They just wanted to be heard. They just wanted to be reassured that they weren't crazy. All
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
think about it. People who have these kind of experiences, all right, they have no way of categorizing that in their brains. All right? They we all have that filing system in our head, for our day to day activities. You get up, you make breakfast, you drive to work, right? You come home, go to bed, do it all over again.
Yep.
Now, say during that drive to work, a UFO lands in front of you, and little guys get out and collect rocks and plants and get back in and fly away. How do you categorize that? There's no filing system in your head for that. And a lot of people do. They think that they've gone crazy.
Mhm.
And I tell them, after no, you're not crazy. Other people have had the same kind of experiences. Maybe not exactly the same kind of experience, but what you're telling me, I've heard from other people.
Yeah.
And you can see the weight lifted off of their shoulders after they tell me. They may never ever tell anybody else ever again. But the fact that, I was able to listen to them, not laugh at them, and assure them that they've had an experience that other people have had, that
Mhm.
makes a big difference to a lot of people. And so the idea that throughout history, millions probably of people have had weird experiences. And that, I've kind of made it my job to try to, collect these experience, try to categorize them as best as I can. And that's the hard part with these kinds of weird experiences, is that there are a lot of similarities, but then there are a lot of dissimilarities as well. And that's what to me has kept my interest in all these years. Is not only how similar these things are, but how dissimilar they are. So
Yeah,
that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but we can continue on from this point.
absolutely. And I agree with you. When I was working paranormal cases too, a lot of the time, just that person having an empathetic or a sympathetic ear often completely changed their outlook and their lives. And I realized that often working what was originally tossed to me as a paranormal case, it most often wasn't. The star of the show typically wasn't the paranormal activity, it was the psychological activity that was actually really the attraction and the main point there. So I completely agree with you. I see exactly what you're saying there. Even when I did have cases, though, of people who were having psychological breaks or psychotic breaks, there was a handful. But you never tell someone, like, hey, you are crazy. I always phrase it like, hey, I'm seeing certain things here, and these symptoms tell me that you may be developing or showing signs of what was previously latent schizophrenia
Mhm.
or something of that nature. And then here's my recommendation. And of course, it was always up to them whether or not they would go and see the local psychiatrist or psychologist. But at least that was put forth as an option. And there have been a few cases where the person was indeed having issues due to extreme, what I now understand as most likely adrenal deficiency, and possibly also a combination of psychotic features coming out. And once they got those addressed with a dietitian and a psychiatrist, all of a sudden they weren't having these experiences anymore. So there's something to be said. I think it's all about a blended approach there, really, but
Mhm.
empathy is really the key factor. Um, so yeah, you
You
had
know,
a oh, go ahead.
once you said that, I want to make a point though. Um, I I wonder if all of us, all of the time, are having weird experiences, but we tend to ignore them. And I'm not wondering. I know that for a fact that a
Yes.
lot of people, will have a strange experience and will just forget about it, ignore it. Life goes on. Um, but for somebody who may be having mental issues, having these experiences stand out even more.
Yes. Some of
Almost
them were,
almost like a beacon. And so they become very well aware that not only are they having these other issues, but then there's these other things going on that, that they can't figure out, even more so than, from the other things that are going on. So yeah, I always ask, I always say to people, I said, most of us have had at least one bizarre experience in their life, but most of us just tend to try to, oh, well, it was such and such thing, or I must have seen that wrong,
mhm.
and just go on, you know. But so I always say that people need to become, or at least have their eyes open more to these types of experiences, and not be afraid. First of all, because like I said before, these things happen to people all the time, and just be aware that we live in a big, huge, fantastic universe where all kinds of things can happen and are happening, and that we should embrace them, not to the point where it becomes an obsession like a lot of people, but just embrace the weirdness, embrace that we live in a beautiful universe, and keep your eyes open to all of this stuff, because that's really the spice of life, isn't it?
Yes, I agree. And yes, I do agree with what you're saying. Oftentimes, the paranormal and the psychological phenomena were blended together so far for certain clientele that I would assist that unfortunately they were hyper reactive, in my opinion and experience,
Yeah.
to anything that was going on paranormal. And so when I say that the paranormal activity stopped after they got treatment, what I mean, if I'm going to speak as detailed as I prefer to and not use the public lingo, is that these people got help and then their reactivity dropped down to a far more reasonable level. And then the activity seemed to follow suit. And then they weren't noticing these things anymore if they were happening. So that is the full detailed line of thought that I have.
Mhm.
But I've learned to speak in shorthand so as not to bore the public.
Well, and I have worked on cases, say like poltergeist events, where once it comes to some kind of climax, it does then just drop off and just it's gone,
Yeah.
and that surprises a lot of people, and gratifies them too, depending on the type of haunting that was going on. But yeah, I mean, it can do that. I mean, it can just disappear completely and never reoccur again in a person's life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen that happen a few times as well, although the cases that I worked tend to be more longer term if it was actually, in my experience, a separate being, person, or entity there interacting with the clientele and the family.
Right.
If, though, it was what I suspected to be internally generated poltergeist activity, the pattern was exactly as you described. It
Hmm.
would happen seemingly out of nowhere. It would be extreme and intense for a period of time. And then for some reason, it would just drop off completely with seemingly no real solid pattern or explanation, and may or may not happen again. So it's interesting. It is an interesting world that we live in, isn't it?
It really is. And, talking about, poltergeist phenomena, I mean, that's one of those things that, I love to endlessly speculate about because, I wonder if people really are able just on their own to manifest that kind of energy under whatever kinds of conditions, or if there isn't some kind of help, outside help, coming along, because it's always been, and I mean, it's been a popular theory for a long time that these kinds of hauntings can usually be attributed to like a troubled adolescent in the household, or at least, somebody with experiencing, some kind of problems. But again, how can that generate that kind of energy from an individual? And if if that's the case, why don't we see it more often? Because I mean, practically all of us, have troubled teenage years. Yet that kind of activity is extremely rare. And when it does happen, I mean, it's very noticeable, and a lot of times gets, the headlines. So, it's an interesting subject, and as somebody told me one time, their perception was that, say, like, a teenager or a troubled individual will actually produce like a ball of energy that's not that powerful, but is noticeable. And then an outside entity, energy, whatever you want to call it, sees that, and then kind of like a football kicks it around for a while, you know,
Oh,
and generates more, energy in the process of kicking it around and playing with it and stuff. It's kind of a simplistic way of explaining the unexplainable, but I just always kind of like that idea. It's like, that's an interesting way of putting it.
no ball in the house.
Right, exactly. Don't play ball in the house.
I, I of course, I don't. I don't know what the objective answer is, and I'm not claiming at all to know. I all I know is what worked in the cases that I had to contend with. And so that's the formula that I stuck with.
Mhm.
However, I will say that I fully believe that what you're saying is likely true in at least some of the cases, because I have come across, at least I believe I have, entities, beings, people, whatever you'd like to call them, who were attached to a specific home or a building, and a troubled family would move in and they would see the opportunity to mess with that family, to maybe try to spur them on to developing healthier ways of being or seeking help. And they would create negative energy using the energy output from the family. And they would make it unbearable. This is
Mhm.
at least what the non-human people told me. They would make it unbearable so that these people would seek help, and that was the only way that they could really communicate with the human family, and they have to live there with them. They're just on a slightly higher vibration, if I'm understanding properly, and they're sick of the fighting, they're sick of the torment, the alcoholism, witnessing child abuse and stuff like that. And then there were a few other times though where there were really negative beings, people, etc., who were feeding off of that energy. and who lived there in that house. And that was a completely different protocol. And that's where it really got messy.
Hmm.
But my team would sometimes capture paranormal evidence, EVPs, photo, video, to corroborate some of what I was saying. So I agree with you in full. I just think that there are a few different sides of the coin there, at least in my own experience. Sounds reasonable to me, and it lines up with what I've gone through. So
Oh yeah, yeah. And I wrote a book a few years back called Jeff the Talking Mongoose, which was a very a bizarre. Who knows what? Who knows if it was a haunting or like a fairy event or what have you that took place on the Isle of Man in the 1930s. But some of the chapters I wrote about poltergeist activity when it builds up so much energy that it actually starts to talk, which
yeah,
is very rare.
very rare.
But I mean, when it does happen, say like the Bell Witch
Mhm,
in Tennessee, I mean, it then becomes very powerful, very verbose,
mhm.
and you can't shut the things up. But at one point, I speculate that what if uh, the talking poltergeist is actually a form of ancient artificial intelligence, because I had run across a remote viewer who was investigating the Bell Witch, and they got the impression that the patriarch of the family, John Bell, had accidentally dug up an ancient artificial intelligence from a antediluvian civilization. All right. That this was something that had been developed for a completely different purpose. But now that this civilization has long since moldered into dust, this artificial intelligence was still around, albeit in a very low energetic state, but being dug up or however it was contained, being taken out of the ground, um, caused it to revive and then do whatever it is. It was obviously not what it was supposed to do. I doubt if it had been meant, to torment a family, screaming obscenities, biblical verses, and interfering with normal day to day activities. But just the fact that you're dealing with some kind of artificial intelligence that remain for as long as its energy would allow.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not saying that that's an explanation, but I found that idea rather intriguing, because it kind of goes beyond the, a dead person haunting a family. Because again, where does that energy come from? That type of energy, that excessive energy, because most hauntings tend to be very low profile. You may see a full bodied apparition, things may move around, there may be knocks on the wall, but that's pretty much it. So, I mean, if you're dealing with a discarnate being, where are they getting that type of energy from?
I do have to say, from what I was told from the apparently non-human people that I've worked with in the past, they're gathering energy from the environment. So they're gathering electronic energy from lights and from batteries and like the fridge and the stove, but then they also can gather emotional energy that is put out by the living human beings and living animals. That's what I was told anyways. And apparently human spirits can do that too when they've left the body. But I don't know, I don't really buy into the theory that human hauntings are so very common, because in all of the years that I did tarot work, healing work, paranormal investigation, paranormal counseling, and in all of my own personal experiences, I've only had was it it's two I've only had two or three, but I want to say two cases where it really did seem like there was a human haunting. And those cases, there was deep, unfinished family or like family friend business there. And again, just providing that existential type of therapy to the people who were left living dissipated what was going on. So my own personal pet theory is that these people had possibly generated a tulpa essentially from their grief. That's what I'm kind of thinking. Of course, I don't know, because the spirit who seemed to be communicating with me seemed to be a really well-formed person.
Hmm.
And I don't believe that it was a hoax, because I don't think that they could fake some of the stuff that I saw, some of the stuff that I felt. But I also don't believe that it is a human spirit, because the people who were left living were far more upset than the seeming human spirit. So when there's that emotional disconnect there, that tells me that one side has far more emotional upset and investment than the other.
Hmm.
And so this says to me, okay, I'm either dealing likely with some type of tulpa, or it's a mimic who has very low ego and emotional content and they're not bothering to mask anymore, or maybe it's some kind of AI, or maybe I'm crazy, you know?
Hmm.
But to me, the tulpa just seems about right. What do you think?
Well, Paul Eno, who
Mm-hmm.
has been a lifelong investigator, researcher, and has worked on a number of cases. And he actually wrote a chapter in our book, Mimics the Others Among Us.
Yes.
His idea from his experience is that in the majority of these cases, and again we're back to poltergeist, is that these are, he calls them parasites. He says that these are basically predators, parasites that exist alongside our own reality, are able to interact with us, but aren't corporeal like we are. All right. They can be to a certain extent at times, but he thinks that these things interact with us to feed off of us, that they haunt houses to generate negative emotions because that is their food. That is their bread and butter. So the more afraid they can make you, the more angry, the strong emotions is what they crave. And so in a lot of these houses where this kind of activity is taking place, those are the emotions that are attempted to be generated. It's a lot of these places where you'll have, and the one thing about poltergeist cases is that whatever is going on, it's very aware of what is being said and thought in
Yeah.
that house. All right. So if somebody would happen to say, maybe it's just off the cuff, well, maybe we're dealing with demons here, then the very next day you can bet that any kind of activity going on is going to lead people to believe that you're dealing with demons. If there are crosses on the wall, they're turned upside down. Bibles are burnt. Just anything that'll lead to that, to the confirmation of that, because that generates fear, and that's, nom nom nom. I'm gonna eat that up. Paul actually, in a case that he worked on in, it was either Connecticut or New Hampshire. I'm sorry, Paul, if I can't remember exactly what it was, where a teenage girl was the one that was being harassed by these things. Uh, he was at the house playing checkers with this girl when they actually saw like several um, smoky like beings come into the room and head towards the girl. Paul put himself in between and actually put his hands out. And he said that he actually grabbed one of these things by its arms and shoulders. And he said it felt like that he said if the bone, he could feel the bones inside, and they felt like bird bones to him.
Mhm.
Very, very lightweight. But they actually then like passed through him in order to start pushing her around. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, but yeah, and he says that the best cure for these kinds of hauntings is to stop being afraid. Which, yeah, that sounds easier said than done. But
Much easier. Mhm.
he recommends that the families sit around and tell jokes. He says that's
That,
one of the best things that you can do is to start laughing and telling jokes and get rid of that negative energy.
and funny enough, you literally just described part of what I used to tell my own clients to do. So when I started working these cases where I was going into people's houses, I was very fresh with this type of stuff. And that's part of, I think, why I was chosen. They just wanted to hear what I saw and what I heard and what I felt and all that. But it turned into much more over time working with this church. So I would go in, and there were several so-called demon hauntings. And um, these I don't want to call them creatures. So I'm just going to start calling everyone else people because I really do think that they are people. We, we eat meat, we take life for our sustenance, and that's just how it is here. So I don't think any less of these people for what they do, as long as they're not doing this just for fun to a detrimental extent, which I have learned that most of them don't. So when I was doing these cases, I started coming across a lot of so-called demon cases, and this is the Catholic Church, after all, that I'm working with.
Mhm.
But when I would go in, and my bug eyes, they see a lot. So I would start to see these so-called demons, and they would talk to me. And they were often very surprised, one, to have someone like me there, and two, that I could see them
Mhm.
and hear them. And I often would just have to have the family leave the room so I could talk in private with these other people. And I would just ask them, "Can you please tell me what's going on? Please just give me the truth. It's likely that we're just going to talk and strike a new deal. There's nothing. I'm not here to banish you. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to mediate." They would tell me that this is their food source. The low vibration of the clients that I was trying to help, and all of the flurry and all of the activity and sympathy and attention or resource being poured into that family, all of that was their food. Excuse me. And there were several times where these other people would apologize and say, "I can't help that this is what my diet is. This is what I have to eat in order to stay healthy." So I would talk to them about these things in detail. This is how I learned seemingly so much about this type of activity and whatnot. And they would just tell me, "It is nothing personal against this family or anything of that nature. They're just on the vibration and putting out my type of food. So here I am. Why not? They're offering it for free." So um, I would ask,
They're tasty.
exactly. Like, you know who Gary Arnold is?
Yes.
That dude he puts out hella food for these people. And they tell him, they say, "You're our favorite." If I was these people, he'd be my favorite too.
Really. Huh.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Listening to some of the stuff that he says on air and how emotional, often in a more negative way that he can be.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I absolutely would. I absolutely would feed on him. He'd be my first pick. He would. Um, um, so they often told me that they really do feed on people who are extremely emotional, especially the more religious and or the more political they are. The
Oh
more
yeah.
Yeah. So I started to notice over time that it seemed like these people were telling me the truth, because every single family that I've ever dealt with that had so-called demon activity were extremely religious and were extremely politically charged, one way or the other. It doesn't matter. It was just, extremes, emotional extremes. Then they also tended to have a dirty house.
Hmm.
They tended to have, yes, alcoholism, child abuse, excuse me, domestic violence, animal abuse, animal neglect, just filth. And then no cleansing of the auric body, and they didn't keep good hygiene. And so I was told by these people, these are all different types of food that we feed on because they generate certain energy, and it's never anything personal. So I would say, okay, these people seem to be sick of it. How can we negotiate you finding a new food source? A lot of times these people would tell me, well, they'd have to change their whole life. I'm not
Hmm.
leaving unless they do. So then it becomes brokering a deal with the human family. Okay, look, I know about what's going on in your house. And I had a few families just lose it on me, blow up on me because I wasn't supposed to know
Right.
certain dirty details. I wasn't supposed to know about Karen's day drinking and the rage that Bob has when he comes home, stuff like that. So I would say, this is what I was told. This is apparently how you fix it. And there were some families who did. They really did. And so I would come back a few months later and the spirit or the non-human person would tell me, this, you're right. This family is serious. They really don't want to live like that anymore and the food supply is diminishing, so I'm thinking about leaving. All they had to do was keep raising their vibration and having fun, laughing, being lighthearted, dropping all of the religious and or the political extreme feelings and outbursts,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that you're eating a genetically appropriate diet for yourself and for your family, keeping a clean home, making sure that you're living in mindfulness and gratitude. If someone can build a life like that, they don't have these problems. And so that's why well, you know me by now. I hope I'm very careful about my life and the vibration that I keep and whatnot, because I understand that, at least I think I do. And now every type of paranormal activity that I have is really fun. It's really mysterious. It's very positive, and I have no problems. If anything even tries to come in, it's very simple for me to tell them to get lost and set that boundary. And then that's the end of it. But, anyways, thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk, Tim. Do you have any questions?
Well, I was going to ask you, does that include whatever it was that was knocking in your cabinet when you were talking to
Mike Tillie.
Mike Clellan? Yeah.
Yeah, I am so curious who that was. I have no idea. I have no idea. I wasn't able to investigate on the spot because I was on camera
Sure. Yeah.
with Mike. I don't want to be rude. And he was in the middle of an awesome story. So, but yeah, no one else knows this story yet, friends, because it just happened yesterday and I've only shared it with a few people. This will be coming to my Patreon. I'll have the short video up and a short description. But I did an interview yesterday, November 30th. Yes, November 30th, right? Oh goodness. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was November 30th.
Yeah. It's well, it was December 1st right now as we're recording this particular section.
Yes. So November 30th, we had a wonderful show. I hope you all enjoy it. And then at the end, he was telling me a story off air. And I have a large, beautiful carved wooden antique dresser. And in the middle of his story, I hear a massive knock coming from the inside, just one knock, but it was really loud here in person. And it was so loud, my friends, that it was caught on camera. And I do have proof of that now, and my reaction to it is on camera and everything. So yeah, that was a really good catch. It was a really good catch. I haven't caught anything paranormal for a hot minute. I was very happy about that.
Well, the section that you sent me, you could definitely hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I sent it to Artemaeus to make sure that I wasn't crazy. And he's like, no, I definitely hear that. And I sent it to Mike, and Mike responded, oh, yeah, I hear that. And I wonder what the significance is. So we were
Hmm.
chatting about that as well. Good. Do you have any paranormal activity caught on tape or anything yourself?
No.
No.
No, I've tried. I have tried, and and that's the majority of the time when you're trying to get that kind of evidence, boy,
Yes,
the phenomena goes out of its way to avoid you.
it
um,
does.
yeah, years ago, when I was in investigating a poltergeist case, when I was still working in television, I had managed to be able to take all of my camera equipment that I worked with at the television station, and I had camera, recorder deck, batteries, tapes, everything to go. And I had these, all my batteries were fully charged, and I hadn't been in the house really more than 10 minutes, and all of the batteries were dead.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. And I mean, and we're talking about, I mean, these were big NiCad batteries that they used to use on these cameras and recorder decks that,
Oh,
I mean, they would last a long time, but I mean, this gear required quite a bit of battery power in order to operate. And these batteries were dead within minutes. It was amazing how quickly every single one of these batteries were drained. The only battery that wasn't drained was I had a little film camera, SLR camera.
yeah.
That the battery that I can't even remember now. It probably just it probably just I don't even know if it even operated the viewfinder. I'm
Oh
not
no.
sure. I'm not. Well, you have to remember this has been 30 years ago plus when this happened. So I'm not quite sure just what that, but like it was one of those little round batteries that, that was the only thing that didn't get drained in that. So I managed to, this is a situation where we saw rocks falling from the ceiling of the house. And then afterwards, I took a picture of my hand holding these rocks, and that camera did work, but all the video equipment, that stopped working right away.
Yeah.
But that's one of the frustrations in researching and investigating this kind of phenomena, is that it does go out of its way to being recorded. Um, which naturally enough, I mean that leads a lot of scientists to thinking that it's all just a bunch of bull, because it can't be replicated in a laboratory.
Correct.
And, and that's, in order for, science to work, it has to be reproducible every time exactly the same way in a laboratory.
Right.
And so far, paranormal activity, psychic phenomena, just refuses to cooperate. You'll have situations where um, doing laboratory studies on say, like, ESP or psychokinesis, where it'll work for a while,
Uh-huh.
and then it'll just stop and never work again, and no matter how hard the person who is part of the experiments will try, they can't reproduce it again. So I mean, it's no wonder there's so much skepticism, when
Yeah,
it comes to this kind of phenomena.
absolutely. When I was working cases, again, my non-human connections told me that they prefer to drain batteries, especially from cameras and cell phones, as quickly as possible. And then next would be flashlights or lights.
Mm,
Firstly, the recording equipment, it accomplishes a few things at once. One, it gives them energy immediately, and two, it prevents recording
mhm,
because they don't like to be told what to do by humans, because most of them honestly do look down on humans. The ones that most of them I bet. So like Gary Arnold's non-human connections, they're always judging human people. And
mm,
yeah, if you've heard his reports of that, they're like, yeah, they know what's going on in my house and in my parents' house, and they have no problem telling me where I effed up, as well as telling me where my parents effed up. And in a way, I get that because I'm pretty open and honest. I've explained to you before, I really don't like most human people. I hate to say that, truly I do, because of the propensity towards lying and manipulation and whatnot. And
Mhm.
I understand that we live in a very physical universe and there are finite resources and everyone's competing to survive. So I try to have empathy, but sometimes I slip up, you know. And you've heard me talk, so think about that on steroids.
Mhm.
So these non-human people, a lot of them are there to get their own needs met as well as to pass judgment on human people who are not doing what they deem is good or correct or healthy and whatnot. And I believe that there's a purpose for all of this in the grand scheme, but in the meantime, it does result in more trauma and drama for the human people involved. And does that in the day to day, is that really healthy? I don't think so, personally. So yes, I was told that they like to drain the energy of the batteries of the cell phones and the recorders and cameras and stuff very first for those two purposes, and then on top of that, they can use that energy then to mess with the human people more. So it doesn't surprise me at all that all of the batteries are drained and then all of a sudden you've got rocks falling out from wherever. That's very common. And I had to work with a lot of the human clients and just say, hey, the less you feed into this, the less surprised you behave, the less eventually the less surprised you'll feel. And then that takes away their food source in part. And then we can work on other things too to revoke whatever invitations that you've got put out to these kinds of people who are feeding on you.
Mhm.
But the flashlight thing used to be really important that they would drain out flashlights because it did amp up more fear and anxiety in the human people that were being fed off of.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I
Oh
had
yeah.
another, I don't remember. Please take the floor.
No, no, no. I was just going to say that whole, things happening in the dark. I mean, talk about a primal terror in people, because I mean, we evolved basically hiding in caves at
Mhm.
night so as not to be eaten by the saber-toothed tigers just lurking
Yeah.
outside the ring of light from your fire at the cave's mouth. So, I mean, we think that we're civilized and sophisticated, but that terror still exists within us when we turn that light off to go to bed, or turn the light off in the living room and then you have to walk to your bedroom in that
Yeah.
darkness.
Or that long walk to the bathroom in the middle of the night. That long
Right, right.
walk.
That's still a significant part of us, and I have no doubt that there are other, you call them people, I'll say entities, whatever, who are more than happy to exploit that
Yes.
and
Oh,
have
yeah.
been exploiting it, as long as we have been conscious beings on this planet.
Oh, I agree. Even myself, I do see a lot of things in the dark. I've caught other types of people and entities and energies in the room at night or in like the closet. And on my channel, I talk about a few of those experiences. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. I have a nightlight every night. We don't go to bed without a nightlight because when you've got just plain darkness, it is, in my understanding and experience, it's a clean slate almost.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's really easy for them to manifest if they've gathered energy from other areas of the house, or maybe they were in another person's house and they took energy and now they brought it here and now they're going to use it however they see fit. And if you've just got that plain dark room and there's no TV on or anything like that, it's far easier for them because there's no electricity being projected from like a TV or some type of tablet or something, and they can get in there and cause some mischief. And I've seen a little bit of that myself, and I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan.
Well, I mean, I have done my best over the years to I'm not very sensitive, not very psychic. Um and I've worked to basically keep it that way because I'm well aware of what exists all around us all the time,
Yeah.
and I see no reason to become aware of it. Because a lot of times, if you become aware of it, it becomes
Yeah.
aware that you're aware of
It
it.
does.
What is it saying? Like, if you look into the abyss looks
It
back.
looks back.
Yeah, and it's like that, with the world of the weird, even though I'm very interested in it and have researched it and written about it for years and years, doesn't mean that I necessarily want to participate in it,
Mhm.
because with so many people, that that opens up the floodgates, you
Oh, for
know.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've had people who have, say, had a simple UFO sighting,
Yeah.
and it will open that up. And I mean, that's a whole different conversation with the what the UFO phenomena is, and why it also involves paranormal phenomena.
Mhm.
But it will open that up, and a person's life can change so completely
Yes.
that it's like, I wish that I had never seen that thing,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
Because I mean, I've had people who have become so obsessed with it
Hmm.
that they've lost their family, their friends. I've had people who, and usually this involves more of, like a close encounter of the fourth kind of
Hmm.
experience, where they will have an awakening in scientific and mathematical abilities within them, where somebody who had spent most of their life going to work and then getting drunk, uh, leave that all behind and become just really a mathematical prodigy, and develop an interest in high level physics and cosmology, things like that. So I mean, that's not for me.
For you.
That's what I was getting. That's what I was getting to in this really roundabout fashion. Is that, when you do the kind of work that I have done, you really have to make sure that it doesn't become an obsession with you,
Thank you.
that
Yes.
you maintain your normal everyday life with your family. This stuff is interesting. I like to write about it. I like to read. I like to talk to people about it. But that's where it ends.
Yeah.
I'm not going to open myself up to talking to these things or inviting them into my house, or none of this kind of stuff. And in the rare times when it looks like that, something is trying to, break through that fourth wall, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'll put
Yeah.
I'll no, I'll put my foot down, and it's not going any further than that, you know.
Good.
So,
Good. When
yeah.
I
Now go ahead.
go ahead. Jinx. I'm sorry, Tim. Please
No, no,
continue.
no, 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 no. I made my point. I was just going to start rambling on at that point. So, yeah.
Fair, fair. I was just going to say that I completely agree with you. And after the years of work that I did counseling human people on these matters, I just got to a point where I told people, I think it's a really bad idea for you to go outside and try to summon UFOs. Please stop that. Please stop trying to contact Aunt Gertrude with prayer or the Ouija board, Please stop reading certain types of material and watching certain types of material, because I discovered that all those things are invitations. You know, And there are exceptions. I do advocate actually working with fairies, certain types of fairies, certain types of non-human so-called alien people, and I do respect the land guardians, the forest guardians enough to advocate a certain way to work with them. And that's it. And it's in a very tight, controlled context. And it's only for very certain types of human beings who are extremely mature, extremely consistent, and who want to do this as a lifetime venture so that everyone's needs are getting met. Because non-human people have a completely different psychology than human people.